Imagine turning the dial of an old radio in the dead of night just to see what strange sounds still drift across the airwaves. The signal hisses and cracks, a sea of static where lost voices sometimes hide. Then suddenly, you hear a dull, mechanical buzz repeating over and over, never stopping, never changing. No music, no voice, just that sound. That's the buzzer. A station with no name, no official purpose, and no known operators. Yet it has been broadcasting this same haunting tone since the late 1970s. The sound has become part of Cold War legend, a ghost of radio waves that refuses to die. Shortwave radio has always been a strange world, especially during the Cold War. It's a space where governments hid coded transmissions in plain sight, a place where invisible voices carried orders, lies, or warnings across oceans. But UVB-76 is different. It doesn't seem to have a message at least not one that anyone has been able to decode. The station operates on a frequency of 4,625 kHz, a band of static where, through the constant hum, you'll hear the same mechanical buzzing tone roughly 25 times every minute. It's been described as hypnotic, lifeless, and deeply unnerving. Once you've heard it, you don't forget it. The earliest recordings of the station date back to the late Soviet era. Back then, radio hobbyists and intelligence watchers assumed it was a military communication channel. Maybe it relayed coded instructions to field units. Maybe it was part of the massive Soviet defense network known as Dead Hand, a doomsday system designed to automatically launch nuclear weapons if command centers were destroyed. In that theory, the buzzer acted like a heartbeat. As long as the signal stayed alive, everything was fine. But if it ever stopped, it could mean the end of the world. For decades, the broadcast didn't change. Just that endless mechanical hum. Then, one day in the early 1990s, something strange happened. The buzz stopped. In its place, a man's voice spoke in Russian, UVB-76. UVB-76, then came a series of numbers, like coordinates or ciphers. 9403, 7480, 1808, it lasted less than a minute, and then the buzz returned. Amateur listeners caught the event on tape, and it spread through shortwave communities like wildfire. For the first time, the station had acknowledged its own name, UVB-76, but the meaning behind the message was never explained. Since then, the pattern has repeated. Years of silence broken by moments of eerie speech. Sometimes the messages are read by a single male voice. Other times by different speakers, always emotionless, always brief. The messages usually follow the same format: random Russian names, number sequences, or call signs. Some seem like coded orders. Others sound like nonsense. The broadcast never offers context, never repeats itself, and never provides clues about its purpose. It's as if you re-listening to a machine that occasionally remembers it has a soul. In 2010, something even stranger occurred. For years, the signal had been traced to a small transmission site near Povadovo, a quiet town outside Moscow. Then suddenly, the signal went dead. Listeners thought the mystery might finally be over, but just a few hours later, the buzzing returned on the same frequency, from a completely different location. Radio sleuths triangulated the news source to a military base near St. Petersburg. It was as if the buzzer had moved. But why would someone relocate a decades-old broadcast that supposedly meant nothing? That question still hangs unanswered in the static. Some of the people who tracked the move say the Povarovo site wasn't abandoned cleanly. When they visited the area, they found evidence of a hasty departure. There were empty buildings, piles of paper, and abandoned radio equipment. One report even mentioned a calendar from 2010 left open on the wall, the day circled in red. If the story is true, it feels like the start of a Cold War ghost story, a military operation gone silent, leaving behind echoes that still haunt the airwaves. Over the years, theories have multiplied. Some think the signal is still part of the Russian military network used to send coded messages during emergencies. Others believe it's a number station, a relic from a time when intelligence agencies used shortwave radio to communicate with spies. The idea was simple. If you had the right codebook, you could decode the sequence of numbers or words into instructions. The beauty of it was that no one could trace the listener. You didn't need the internet or satellites, just a cheap radio and the right frequency. But while other number stations have gone quiet or changed patterns, UVB-76 has kept buzzing. It feels like a relic that refuses to fade, a Cold War machine running long after the war ended. There's another theory that's even darker. Some think the buzzer isn't transmitting to anyone at all. It's just broadcasting noise to occupy a frequency to make sure no one else uses it. In radio jargon, that's called a channel marker. But that explanation doesn't fit the occasional voice messages, nor does it explain why the tone changes in texture and rhythm at times, as though being affected by movement inside the room it's transmitted from. In one recording, faint background noises can be heard, chair moving, a door creaking, and what sounds like footsteps. That detail chilled everyone who listened. It meant someone was physically there, tending to the machine, someone who might still be there today. Imagine that job for a moment, sitting alone in a dim radio shack, surrounded by the hum of old Soviet equipment, making sure the buzzer never stops. No one to talk to, no explanation, no audience, just you. It's a scene that feels pulled straight from psychological horror. The person becomes part of the signal, their life fading into the sound. Some say that's why the buzz sometimes shifts slightly in pitch or tempo tiny. Human imperfections creeping into a system that's supposed to be pure and mechanical. Radio enthusiasts still listen every day. They record the signal, analyze its background noise, and trade theories online. Sometimes they hear Morse code hidden beneath the buzz. Sometimes they catch brief moments of silence before the hum restarts. Each anomaly sparks excitement, as if the dead channel is trying to speak. One recording captured what sounded like fragments of a conversation, two voices faintly audible behind the buzz, as though a microphone had been left open by mistake. No one ever identified the speakers. The mystery deepened, but the machine went on as if nothing had happened. What's most disturbing about the buzzer is its persistence. Empires have fallen, borders have changed, technology has evolved, but that monotonous signal keeps pulsing out of the Russian wilderness like a digital heartbeat. It's as if the machine doesn't care who's listening anymore. It just needs to exist. People die, governments collapse, and still the tone continues, each buzz like a clock ticking through time. Some listeners have called it the loneliest sound in the world. Others think of it differently. They hear the buzzer as a kind of guardian. As long as it keeps going, maybe nothing catastrophic has happened. The idea that a world-ending system might depend on this strange, fragile tone gives the broadcast a quiet, dreadful power. The station becomes both a comfort and a curse. You don't want it to stop, but if it ever does, you'll know something is terribly wrong. That's the story of UVB-76, a voice that shouldn't exist, a sound that hums on through decades, surviving the end of nations, and possibly carrying a message no human was ever meant to hear. If you ever find yourself awake late at night, tuning through the radio static, you might stumble upon it. Just that endless pulsing buzz whispering through the darkness. A reminder that not all ghosts are human. Some speak in frequencies, some hide in the noise. If this kind of story keeps you curious or awake long after you wanted to sleep, then you're in the right place. Stay close to the static. More mysteries are coming. Like, comment, and subscribe to Belmoze. The sound of the buzzer has been echoing through shortwave radios for nearly half a century, and the deeper you go into its story, the more it starts to feel like a ghost that refuses to rest, a sound from another era still haunting the airwaves. If you think of it as a relic, then it's the kind of relic that still breathes. The continuous buzzing on 4,625 kilohertz has led many to believe it isn't just noise. It's a signal with a purpose, a mechanism that watches the silence between nations. Some call it a dead man's switch. Others call it the heartbeat of a machine that once promised the end of the world. During the Cold War, paranoia was its own form of defense. Every side believed the other could strike first, and every second counted. Out of that fear came systems designed to keep fighting, even if humanity itself vanished. In the Soviet Union, one such system was rumored to exist. Its codename was Perimeter, but most called it Dead Hand. It was said to be an automatic nuclear retaliation mechanism, built so that if the Soviet command structure was destroyed by an American strike, a computer would detect it and launch nuclear missiles in response. No living person needed to give the order. Once armed, it was a machine running on pure logic, blind to mercy or regret. The theory around the buzzer is that it was connected to that kind of system. Its constant tone was like a pulse, a sign that the system was still alive. If the buzz ever stopped, it could mean the worst had already happened. Think about what that would mean for the people responsible for maintaining it. Somewhere, deep in the forests near Moscow or St. Petersburg, a small group of operators sitting in a silent bunker, making sure the tone never breaks. Their job wouldn't be glamorous. It would be constant vigilance, endless repetition, and absolute secrecy. Imagine the pressure of knowing that if something goes wrong with the machine you watch, millions could die. It's a simple duty, but it's soaked in dread. The dead man ES switch idea has always fascinated radio listeners because it perfectly fits the eerie simplicity of the broadcast. The buzz is repetitive, mechanical, and monotonous, like the sound a life support machine makes in a hospital. It doesn't convey words, only existence. It's the sonic equivalent of a light left on in an empty house. But that light means something. In this case, it could be keeping a deadly system asleep, or worse, ready. Many analysts believe the tone serves as a channel marker. In shortwave communication, that means it keeps a frequency open and prevents interference from other stations. But what's strange about UVB-76 is that most channel markers down T last decades without explanation. This one has been broadcasting non-stop for over 40 years, and every now and then, it speaks. Those cryptic Russian messages and coded names don't sound random, they sound procedural, as if someone is testing the line, checking the connection to whatever machine or network it belongs to. The lack of pattern is its own kind of pattern. There's a particular kind of fear that comes from the unknown mixed with order. Chaos can be explained, but a machine that works perfectly for no visible reason feels inhuman. It's as if the purpose has outlived the people who made it, and the system just keeps going, unaware that the war it was meant to fight is long over. That's what makes UVB-76 so chilling. The Soviet Union has been gone for decades, yet the signal remains. It's like hearing a soldier's last heartbeat still echoing through the ground long after the battle ended. The timing of its origin supports this theory. The first recordings of the signal surfaced in the late 1970s, right when Cold War tensions were peaking again. The arms race was accelerating. Both sides were modernizing their nuclear arsenals, and shortwave communication networks became a vital part of military infrastructure. Everything needed redundancy. Every command center needed a backup, and every backup needed to survive nuclear fire. A signal like UVB-76 would fit neatly into that structure. If the Kremlin ever fell silent, the buzz would serve as proof to automated systems that communication lines were still intact. Once the buzz died, the system would interpret that silence as annihilation and react accordingly. But here's where things get darker. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the buzz didn't stop. It changed tone slightly, moved location, and evolved. But it didn't end. That suggests the network it's tied to is still active. The Russian military inherited much of the old Soviet infrastructure, including systems that nobody dared to shut down because no one could fully explain how they worked. A machine built to outlive its creators doesn't come with an off switch. If you picture this station as a piece of physical machinery, a transmitter inside a sealed bunker, then it's easy to imagine layers of dust and decay creeping around it. While the tone continues, without care, a world changing outside, cities rising and falling, wars beginning and ending. Yet deep in some cold room, the equipment hums. The sound might be automated now, a signal looping endlessly. But someone still pays the electricity bill. Someone still maintains the tower. That fact alone makes it more unsettling. Somewhere out there, a human being still tends to this machine, following orders they might not even understand. In 2010, when the signal briefly went silent and then reappeared from a new location, it proved the system was still active. The move wasn't an accident. It meant the operation had modern caretakers, perhaps within Russia's Western Military District, which oversees communications in that region. The new site was traced to a military installation near St. Petersburg, not far from an old radar command post. So even after decades of speculation, the broadcast remains officially unacknowledged but unmistakably alive within a military structure. Sometimes, listeners report subtle changes that feel like ghostly movements in a machine. The buzzing changes pitch for a moment, or a faint sound of movement can be heard in the background: footsteps, furniture shifting, doors opening and closing. It gives the impression that the system isn't entirely automated. Maybe someone walks into that silent room once in a while, checks a switch, adjusts a control, and then leaves, letting the machine continue its endless hum. Those moments are fleeting, but unforgettable. They remind listeners that the broadcast isn't just a digital artifact, it's physical. It exists somewhere real. If the buzzer really is a Cold War dead man's switch, it represents a horrifying kind of logic. It's the idea that the machine no longer serves human beings. It protects its own function. It doesn't act out of malice or vengeance. It acts out of programming. The very thing that makes it reliable also makes it terrifying. In theory, its purpose would only activate when no one is left to hear it. The signal's constancy becomes both a comfort and a threat. As long as you can hear it, civilization still stands. If it stops, there's nothing left to save. The eerie persistence of the buzzer fits a pattern seen in many old systems that have slipped beyond human understanding. Like satellites still orbiting Earth, sending meaningless telemetry decades after their missions ended, or computer programs running on servers that no one remembers maintaining. The buzzer sits at the edge of that same existential fear that we VH built things that now operate outside of us, but still depend on us enough to keep existing. Machines with no purpose except to endure. There's something poetic about the thought that this buzzing sound is a kind of ghost, not the ghost of a person, but of an era. A Cold War haunting that refuses to fade, humming across continents, reminding us that the paranoia of that time never really went away. The signal is proof of how the human drive for security can create something that never stops, even when it should. So, late at night, when shortwave listeners lean close to their radios and hear that faint, repetitive tone, they aren't just tuning into static. They're hearing history breathing through the wires. They're listening to a machine that was built to survive the end of the world. And did, and until someone, somewhere, decides to pull the plug, the ghost in the machine will keep on buzzing, long after the living have stopped listening. It was November 22, 1987, a quiet Sunday night in Chicago. Most people were winding down, flipping through local news broadcasts before heading to bed. Then, without warning, one of the city's biggest television stations went dark. The familiar face of sportscaster Dan Roan on WGN's nightly news suddenly froze. The screen flickered, and for a few seconds, only static filled the air. Then something impossible appeared. The image cut to a person wearing a plastic mask, a distorted, grinning face modeled after Max Headroom, the fictional AI television host from the 1980s. The background behind the figure was a strange, shimmering metal panel that looked eerily similar to the digital backdrop used in the original Max Headroom TV show. But this wasn't clever editing. It was raw, jittery, and chaotic. The voice that came through wasn't synthetic or charming. It was warped, metallic, and unstable, shifting in tone as if someone were speaking through a broken vocoder. For 25 seconds, this figure replaced the regular broadcast. He mumbled disjointed phrases, laughed erratically, and made references that didn't make sense. It was both funny and horrifying, like a dream trying to imitate humor but losing its way. Then, just as quickly as it started, the signal snapped back to normal. The WGN engineers had managed to regain control, shaken but unsure what they had just seen. 2 hours later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't on a local news station. It hit WTTW, Chicago's PBS affiliate, during an airing of Doctor Who. Halfway through the episode Horror of Fang Rock, the picture cut to black. Then the same masked figure appeared again, the Max Headroom impersonator, this time unfiltered and fully in control. The hijacking lasted about 90 seconds. The masked man spoke in a voice full of distortion and nonsense, waving a can of Pepsi, muttering strange phrases about nerds, television freaks, and a rival soda brand. He mentioned a local sportscaster, made a cryptic reference to "Your love is fading," and moved erratically in front of the camera. Behind him, someone moved a large sheet of corrugated metal back and forth, imitating the digital effect used in the original Max Headroom show. It was low-tech, improvised, and surreal. Then came the part that made it infamous. The masked figure bent over and was briefly spanked with what looked like a fly swatter by someone just out of frame. The entire scene was absurd, disturbing, and unsettlingly personal. It felt like a performance, but one performed for no one, except the audience who never asked for it. Moments later, the broadcast ended. The PBS engineers had no way to stop Byton like WGN. They didn't have the same transmission safeguards. The hijacker had completely overtaken their signal, and when it was over, the regular broadcast simply resumed as if nothing had happened. But it had happened. Thousands of Chicago viewers had seen it live. The next morning, the Federal Communications Commission launched an investigation. What the public learned over the next few days was even stranger than the broadcast itself. The hijacker hadn't broken into the television stations physically. Instead, they had overpowered the signal by transmitting a stronger local broadcast frequency that temporarily replaced the station's transmission. To do that in 1987 would have required not just technical know-how but also specialized, expensive equipment and the audacity to use it in one of the largest cities in America. Broadcast engineers explained that for someone to pull this off, they would need access to a high-powered microwave transmitter aimed at the same broadcast tower as the TV station S signal. They would also need to time it perfectly, too early or too late, and it wouldn't override the feed. It wasn't just a prank, it was a masterclass in analog sabotage, and whoever did it knew exactly what they were doing. Despite the technical sophistication, no one ever claimed responsibility. The FBI and the FCC tracked down several leads, analyzed signal strength, and interviewed radio hobbyists, but the case went nowhere. It was the perfect crime of its time. No fingerprints, no digital traces, no witnesses, just a flicker of chaos that lived in the analog airwaves. The Max Headroom incident struck a nerve because it represented a kind of violation that people had never experienced before. Television in the 1980s was sacred ground. It was one-directional. You watched and they broadcast. There was trust in that relationship. To see it hijacked by a faceless, laughing figure shattered that sense of control. It was like discovering someone could walk through your locked front door and perform a bizarre pantomime in your living room before vanishing into thin air. The character of Max Headroom himself added another layer of unease. Originally, he was a satirical creation of computer-generated TV host who represented the future of media. He was fast-talking, artificial, and charmingly obnoxious. But when that plastic face appeared uninvited, stripped of humor and context, it became something else entirely. It turned satire into horror. It was as if the machine had come alive and started speaking back to us. What made the hijacking so unforgettable wasn't just the act itself, but what it implied. Someone, somewhere, had managed to take control of the airwaves, hijack 2 major television networks, and broadcast whatever they wanted directly into thousands of homes. If one person could do that with 1980s technology, what else could be done? It was a warning of a new kind of vulnerability, the idea that the systems we depend on for information and entertainment can be taken over in seconds. For days afterward, Chicago was gripped by confusion and paranoia. Some thought it was a hacker group making a political statement. Others believed it was an inside job. A few even speculated it was a form of experimental performance art. But none of those theories ever fit perfectly. The randomness of the content suggested something more chaotic, someone who simply wanted to prove they could do it. Someone who wanted to break the wall between the watcher and the watched. The imagery itself became a lasting part of broadcast folklore. The flickering metal background, the plastic grin, the hollow laughter, all of it played into a collective unease about television's growing power and reach. People had begun to trust screens more than people. The Max Headroom hacker turned that trust against them. In the decades since, the hijacking has taken on a mythic quality. It's been dissected frame by online sleuths and radio enthusiasts. Some claim to have identified the type of transmitter used. Others say they've narrowed the location to a broadcast tower outside Chicago. But despite every investigation, no one has ever been arrested, and the identity of the masked figure remains unknown. What makes the story linger isn't just the mystery, it's the feeling it left behind. Watching the footage today, it's not just nostalgia for a weird moment in the 80s. It's the realization that the hijacker was wrong about one thing. The line between human and machine communication was already blurring. They turned that line into their stage, even if just for a minute. In a strange way, the Max Headroom hijacking predicted the digital chaos that would come decades later, the deepfakes, the viral misinformation, the anonymous breaches of trust that define the modern internet. It was a warning delivered through the most powerful medium of its time. A prank that wasn't really a prank at all. The message was simple. Nothing you see on the screen truly belongs to you. And the moment you start to believe it does, that's when the mask starts to move. The static takes over. And the signal begins to whisper back. It starts as a low humming electric murmur beneath the noise of the world. Then, from that static void, comes the voice. Cold, monotone, utterly detached from humanity. A male voice speaking in Russian, naming off words and numbers that sound meaningless to anyone listening. UVB-76, 7458, Jana, Nikolai, Anna, Roman. Then silence, the tone resumes, the buzz carries on, and you are left wondering who the message was for Rand, what it just set in motion. For decades, the buzzer, or UVB-76, has been the sound of something vast and unseen. Somewhere in the marshlands outside St. Petersburg, an old radio transmitter emits that never-ending tone. It has been on air almost every day since the 1970s, outlasting the Soviet Union. Multiple Russian presidents, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and even the technology that once gave it purpose. What makes it chilling is not just that it's still broadcasting, it's that sometimes it talks. The first time someone caught one of these voice messages, they thought it was a prank. A strange break in the static where a voice recited a string of numbers and words. But when the pattern repeated over the years with variations and new calscenes, it became clear there was a system behind it. Each broadcast seemed to follow a structure. A call sign would open the message, usually a woman's or man's voice reading something like UZB-76, UZB-76, followed by a phrase that sounded like a Russian name, then a string of numbers or code words. The message would end abruptly, and the buzzing would return, like a lid being sealed over something dangerous. Ham radio operators across Europe have tried for years to interpret what these transmissions mean. Some claim they are number stations, relics of Cold War spycraft designed to send encoded orders to field agents. The logic is simple, but terrifying. The numbers are meaningless to everyone except the person they are meant for. To that one listener, a handful of digits might mean abort mission, change location, or activate sleeper cell. During the Cold War, number stations were known to operate for exactly this reason. The British had them, the Americans had them, the Soviets had hundreds, and while most of them have gone silent, UVB-76 never has. The voice itself is part of the eeriness. It is neither fully human nor mechanical. Analysts have argued for years whether it's pre-recorded or live. In some transmissions, you can hear the faint sound of movement in the background, a door creaking, a chair scraping, sometimes muffled conversation in Russian. These background noises imply the broadcast is not automated. Someone is there in that room, sending these messages by hand. Imagine sitting in that control room, deep in a cold, fluorescent-lit military facility. Your job to read out words you don't understand to a world that's not supposed to be listening. Every once in a while, something stranger happens. The tone disappears for a few seconds, the buzz falters. Then, instead of the familiar mechanical hum, fragments of conversation leak through. Once, in 2010, the tone cut off entirely, replaced by what sounded like people moving furniture, faint laughter, and then, unmistakably, someone saying, "Yeah, UVB-76." It was as if the curtain had slipped and we had overheard the actors backstage. Within hours, the signal changed frequency. The buzzing resumed. The public archives of these recordings are unsettling to listen to. There is something deeply human about hearing a person read words into the void. But there's also something haunting about the lack of meaning. The structure suggests purpose, but the tone denies emotion. It's like hearing the heartbeat of a machine that forgot it was ever built by people. Some listeners even say the rhythm of the buzzer itself, the pulse that repeats over and over every second, feels like a mechanical breathing, as if the network were alive, its tone the sound of life support. Over time, the mystery has deepened because of the language itself. The Russian words read during transmissions are often old-fashioned military-style names and code words, the kind used in encrypted communications. For instance, the Russian military has long used names alphabets, similar to NATO's Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. But the voices on the buzzer sometimes use inconsistent forms or outdated terms, suggesting either an old system still in use or something deliberately made to confuse. It's as if the station speaks a dialect meant to be understood by only one small secret Gruppan audience that might not even exist anymore. Some theories try to connect the broadcasts to the Russian military's emergency communication networks. During the Soviet era, the government maintained an extensive command-down control system designed to withstand nuclear war. In that world, UVB-76 might have served as a backup channel, transmitting orders to missile silos or border units in the event that higher command fell silent. If that's true, then the voice messages we hear could be periodic tests of the system checks to confirm that someone, somewhere, is still ready to receive. Imagine the chilling implication of that. Each time the voice speaks, it's a reminder that a chain of command built for global war still exists in the shadows, waiting for a command that might never come, but the deeper you listen, the stranger it gets. Amateur radio enthusiasts have tracked the station's signal strength, triangulating its origin to several locations over time. In 2010, after one of its longest interruptions, UVB-76 appeared to move from its long-known site near Povorovo, a small town north of Moscow, to another area closer to St. Petersburg. When investigators visited the original site, they found an abandoned military base, empty rooms filled with debris, and remnants of radio equipment still plugged in. It looked like the operators had left in a hurry. A broken microphone lay near a desk, and a single note written in Cyrillic was found with a list of frequencies. Not long after, the buzzing resumed on the new frequency. To this day, no one has ever officially admitted what the buzzer is or who runs it. Russia's Ministry of Defense has remained silent. Even during moments when the signal faltered for days, something that should have sparked concern if it were part of a live military system, the silence from the authorities only feeds the legend that this signal is part of a system so secret it cannot be publicly recognized. The voice broadcasts are the moments when the mask slips. They are the only glimpses we get of human presence behind the endless noise, the cold, bureaucratic delivery, the random timing, the quick return to the buzz. All of it feels like the surface of a hidden ocean, disturbed only for a second before going still again. Some have compared it to the feeling of hearing a ghost through a wall, the unmistakable trace of life somewhere you cannot reach. And yet, even now, people listen. Online streams monitor the frequency 24/7, capturing every whisper, every interruption, every shift in tone. The community of listeners has turned it into a form of collective watching, like keeping vigil over something too old and too powerful to die. When the voice returns, and it always does, it cuts through the monotony like a warning. A flat, emotionless voice reading names into the dark, numbers that mean nothing to us, but everything to someone out there. And as the buzz resumes, you're re-left with a single thought that maybe this isn't just a relic of the past. Maybe it's a reminder. Somewhere in a secure room, a light still glows on a forgotten console. A hand presses a button. A voice speaks. And the buzzer, faithful as ever, hums on. It's strange how some sounds stay with you. The human mind forgets faces, places, even voices you once loved, but it never forgets the things that make it uneasy. The slow mechanical hum of UVB-76, the distorted laughter from that masked face on the Max Headroom hijack. These aren't just noises. They're echoes of something deeper, something that reminds us how fragile our world of signals and screens really is. We built machines to connect us, and somehow they've become the perfect tools to remind us how little control we have left. The story of the buzzer and the Max Headroom broadcast isn't just about two strange signals. It's about the invisible fabric that holds our modern lives together, the radio waves, satellites, fiber lines, and digital pulses that move without us ever seeing them. Most people never think about how much of their life depends on an invisible system that is constantly talking to itself. Every text, every call, every live broadcast is built on trust. We trust that the message we send will be the message received, that the voice on the radio belongs to who it says it does, that the airwaves are ours. But those two events, one old and slow, one sudden and chaotic, proved how easy it is to lose that trust. When you tune in to UVB-76, it's like hearing a ghost that refuses to fade. It drones endlessly, like a machine left running long after its operator died. That buzzing isn't just noise, it's persistence. A voice without words, a message without meaning carried across decades. And yet, every once in a while, it reminds us it's alive. A transmission cuts through, a voice speaks, and suddenly the line between the living and the dead feels thin. You don't need to believe in the supernatural to feel haunted by it, because what's more ghostly than a signal that's outlived its creators? A system that keeps speaking even when no one's sure who it's speaking to. Then there's the Max Headroom incident, the complete opposite of the buzzer's endless monotony. It was chaos, invasion, and absurdity rolled into one. Picture it. You're watching the nightly news in 1987 Chicago. The anchor is mid-sentence when the screen flickers, the image warps. And suddenly, there's a man in a rubber mask, his head jerking in digital spasms, his voice distorted beyond recognition. He's mocking authority, laughing in static bursts, his words twisted and nonsensical. You sit frozen, not knowing if it's a prank, an attack, or something far darker. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the broadcast cuts back. The anchors are silent, unsure what just happened, and no one ever finds out who did it. Those few minutes of hijacked signal did something that even decades of Cold War espionage couldn't. They broke the illusion that the media was untouchable. For the first time, people saw their trusted screens turned against them. The technology that had become part of their daily lives television, that warm, familiar glow in the living room, wasn't safe. Someone had reached through the airwaves and grabbed hold of it. That's what makes it so terrifying. Not the mask, not the static, but the idea that the boundary between you and the unseen world behind your screen could vanish in a blink. When you put these two phenomena side by side, they feel like reflections of each other. The buzzer is the ghost of control, the constant humming sound of authority that refuses to die. Still transmitting in perfect obedience to a command given long ago, max headroom is the chaos that cracks through that control, the reminder that even the most rigid systems can be broken by a single person with enough nerve and the right tools. One is order made monstrous, the other is rebellion made real. Together, they tell a story of how fragile our technological balance really is. Technology has always promised safety. Systems, networks, encryption, these are the words we use to convince ourselves that what we build is secure. But the truth is simpler and far more unsettling. Nothing that relies on connection is ever truly under control. Every signal that can be sent can also be hijacked. Every broadcast that can reach millions can also be twisted by one person sitting in a basement with the right equipment. It's not the complexity of the systems that scariates their openness. Every layer of technology meant to unite us also exposes us. The eeriest part is how these stories still feel alive. UVB-76 is still buzzing right now as you hear this. Somewhere in the static, its tone continues, day and night, watched by thousands of curious listeners online. Every time the sound wavers or the tone changes, the chat explodes with theories. Was it a test? A message? A failure? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. That's the power of it. It doesn't have to mean anything to make people uneasy. The absence of meaning is its weapon. The Max Headroom broadcast, too, never really ended. It lives on through digital folklore, endlessly replayed, dissected, analyzed. Every frame of that hijacking has been studied by countless eyes, but the culprit remains a ghost. No one knows how they did it, what they wanted, or even what they were saying through the distortion. Some think it was just a prank. Others think it was political protest. But maybe the real message was the act itself, the simple, unnerving proof that anyone could invade your signal, rewrite your reality, and vanish without a trace. Both events belong to a past version of the world analog signals, Cold War paranoia. Flickering CRT screens, but their shadows fall directly onto today. We've traded radio frequencies and TV waves for the internet, for digital streams and social networks. But the fear hasn't gone anywhere. If anything, it's multiplied. We've given our trust not just to broadcasters, but to algorithms, devices, entire systems that decide what we see, what we know, and how we think. And still, somewhere in the dark, the same danger hums beneath it, all the danger that the signal could slip from our hands. Imagine it. One night, a broadcast goes out, as usual, but this time, the voice changes. The sound twists. The words don't match the script. People online rush to record it, share it, decipher it. And before anyone can explain what's happening, the feed cuts out. The familiar noise of connection gone. You check your phone, your television, your radio. All you hear is static. That's how fragile it is. That's how close we live to the edge of silence. Maybe that's why these stories keep returning decades after they began. They speak to something more ancient than technologia. Human fear of losing control, of being watched by something that doesn't speak but never stops listening. Whether it's a Cold War transmitter or a rogue signal hijacker, what they both reveal is that the systems we build always outgrow us. They keep running, they keep buzzing, and sometimes they start to sound like something else, something alive. So as you sit here, listening to the faint hum of your own devices, think about that endless buzz still echoing somewhere over Eastern Europe. Think about the masked face flickering across a stolen screen. Think about how every network, no matter how vast, begins with one fragile signal and how easily that signal can turn against you. Because maybe, in the end, That's the real haunting. Not the ghosts in the machines, but the machines themselves, whispering back. If you want more stories like this, strange signals, forgotten frequencies, and the hidden corners of human paranoia, then stay close to the sound. You can find more deep dives into the world's strangest mysteries right here on Belmoze. So, before the static returns, like, comment, and subscribe. You never know when the next signal might cut through.